Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the virtual roundtable. In a minute, I'll turn it over to our moderator, David Brancaccio. But first, I do want to introduce our panel. Shannon Miller is a Florida Bar board certified attorney specializing in elder law, practicing out of Gainesville, Florida. She served as a drafting member of the Financial Exploitation of Vulnerable Adults work group led by Florida State Senator Kathleen Passidomo. As part of the elder law section, she created the new legislation relating to injunctions against exploitation and freezing stolen assets. She's been instrumental in rolling out the exploitation injunction law across the state of Florida and assisting in the drafting of the new AG elder law section, HB 1041, for new and powerful anti-exploitation laws effective July 1, 2021. She serves as the president of the Academy of Florida Elder Law Attorneys, currently serves on the Florida Joint Public Policy Task Force for the Elderly and Disabled, and served as chairperson of the Legislative Committee of the Elder Law Section, and now serves as vice chair of the Elder Law Section of the Florida Bar. You have to bear with me, I have a very big group of accomplished people today. Dr. Nathan Sprang is a James McGill Professor of Neurology and Neurosurgery in the Faculty of Medicine and Health Science at McGill University, and the Director of the Laboratory of Brain and Cognition at the Montreal Neurological Institute. Dr. Sprang was recognized as a rising star by the Association for Psychological Science, and he received the Vincent DeLillo Early Career Award from the Canadian Society for Brain, Behavior, and Cognitive Science. He is currently a member of the Royal Society of Canada's College of New Scholars, Arts and Sciences. His work, which includes over 125 research publications, has led to his designation as a highly cited researcher by the Web of Science, recognizing his broad impact on the field of cognitive neuroscience. Dr. Sprang's research focuses on the organization of large-scale brain networks and how dynamic interactions among brain regions support cognitive and social functioning, and how they impact decision-making capacity across the lifespan, both in normal aging and in neurodegenerative disease. His work is funded in part by the National Institutes of Health, the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, and the Alzheimer's Association. If I didn't know better, I think I was being pranked with these big words, so I appreciate you all for that. David Brancaccio is of American Public Media's Marketplace Morning Report. In 2019, his documentary Brains and Losses, The Bottom Line on Aging and Financial Vulnerability, aired on public radio stations nationwide. Most recently, his reporting has focused on ecosystems of innovation, drawing on the 75th anniversary of the semiconductor revolution. He also covers regulation of financial markets, the role of technology in labor markets, digital privacy, sustainability, and social enterprises. His work has earned some of the highest honors in broadcast journalism, including the Peabody, the Columbia DuPont, the Emmy, and the Walter Cronkite Awards. David anchored the weekly public television news program Now on PBS until 2010. So with that, David, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Kelly, and thank you to everybody who put this together. Why am I here? I don't have any science credentials and certainly not a lawyer. I'm here as an interested party. I feel really passionate about this subject after I did that series in 2019 that Kelly mentioned about financial vulnerability and let's fully understand what I was talking about in 2019. Aging people who seem cognitively a-okay, they seem fine, because if there's a person who's suffering from some sort of diagnosed decline, a dementia, we start to very much worry about vulnerability in so many different ways, including financial vulnerability. But what I was interested in exploring was what about people who seem a-okay? I want to start with a important caveat about any discussion, and I think probably Dr. Sprang will ratify this. It's not everybody who's getting older is more financially vulnerable. Warren Buffett and his partner, Charlie Munger's like 93 now, I think. No, Buffett's 93. I think Munger is like almost 100. They'll know more about money and have more financial acumen than I will had at any age and will ever have, right? So it's not everybody, but we're interested in everyone who's financially vulnerable, but we're also particularly interested in a subset of people who might be especially vulnerable but seem fine. In a few minutes after, I'll explain this amazing person that was very candid and open with me, who shared her life story, who fits that profile of people that I was very, very interested in. Her name is Judy. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But let me turn to Nathan, to Dr. Spring, who's really on the ground doing some fascinating research into this area. Now we're going to start by getting some of the background. When you hear of people who test normal, Nathan, but we're worried about them in terms of being exploitable, what do we know about this at this point?
Well, it's a challenging area to investigate, although it's an extraordinarily important one. So there's billions of dollars are lost every year due to financial exploitation, and it interacts with a number of different components to normal, healthy aging. So as we get older, everybody tends to slow down a little bit, and the dynamic flexibility of our thoughts tends to change and diminish. Our memory isn't quite as sharp. However, over time, as we get older, we also accumulate a lot of knowledge of the world. So there are these two trajectories of cognition that change. On the one hand, we decline in our fluid abilities, but we improve in terms of our knowledge of the world. And that knowledge of the world tends to support the other declines that happen. So actually, by middle-aged and early older adulthood, most people are at their prime for decision-making and their knowledge of how to manage money and to negotiate their finances. However, there are other parts of aging that are more complex. There are a number of brain changes that occur that can impact how people both manage the numericity aspect of money, as well as the more complex social dynamics that can unfold around financial exchanges, particularly when it comes to intergenerational conversations about wealth and the kinds of support that parents and grandparents often give to their children and grandchildren when they have the means to do so. And there become some fuzzy boundaries at times as to what people feel potentially entitled to as younger folks who may be struggling in today's economy. And the interaction between some changes that occur with aging and some of the social pressures that might be present can push some folks to the edge of vulnerability and into a zone where if a perpetrator is present, they're very likely to be exploited. And so a lot of the normal age-related changes that occur to the brain can indeed render most people vulnerable. Now, as you mentioned, some people are just really good at finances and some people not so much. And there's a huge range across the way. And a lot of the financial mechanisms that are out there are extraordinarily complex. And I don't understand them very well. Like I have an accountant who does my taxes because I don't have the patience or the ability to really comprehend what all that stuff means. But given the wide range of individual differences, it's hard to identify who is vulnerable. But it seems like there are specific changes in the context of aging that increase the probability that people could be exploited. And some of that relates to increased levels of trust as one gets older. There are difficulties in the ability to detect deception, as well as some age-related changes that impact the brain. So changes in how we navigate the social world are due to changes to the brain, as well as some increased difficulties with regards to managing funds and money. And again, these things can converge in unfortunate situations.
It's really interesting. I saw a study that identified the age of peak financial acumen. The median is at 53. I'm rather past 53 here. So them days have gone by. And this gets to your earlier point about just, you may have told me when we were reporting a series or somebody else told me, right? You can still run marathons if you're in shape. at an advanced age, but you're not going to run them at the speed that people were running it in their 20s, right? It's things change over time, and so the fluidity is an issue here. We are going to hold off, Nathan, talking about your current research a little later. That's going to be a zesty thing that we're going to engage later. But as we stay on this background for another pass at this, you were able in some of your previous research to find a couple of groups of people, if I remember correctly. And these are people who had been victim of scams. And another set, imagine how hard this would be as a researcher. My heart goes out to you, Nathan, and your team. You also found the second group that had resisted a scam attempt. And you looked at them. And what questions did you ask? And give us a taste of what you found.
That's right. So as part of our program of research, looking at what happens as people get older and the changes that occur to the brain, we actively recruited folks that had been financially exploited through our local Office of Aging and heard their stories. Sometimes it was a family member that did the exploitation, or the contractor that stays around the house and keeps finding issues until the bills add up to the hundreds of thousands of dollars, as well as online scams through phishing. And of course, those phone calls where, you've won all this lottery money, you just have to pay the tax on it first before they can deliver it. So these were cases where people had been financially exploited, and we compared their brain and an extensive cognitive neuropsychological interview with those folks that had been exposed to scams. And at this point, I think everybody's been exposed to one form of a scam or another. And what we found were there are some very specific differences in the structure of the brain. That's the anterior insula. So that's a region that's just down deep underneath your temple. It's down about 1.5 inches. And it's a really interesting structure of the brain in that it integrates signals that come up from our body, as well as our cognition and our goal-oriented behavior and thoughts. So it's this integration of a body sense with what our goals are in the world and how we process information. And this is the anterior insula. It's a structure that is involved in very rapid, sort of, again, like a body feeling about whether something is good or bad. And that sense when you're maybe walking in a new neighborhood, do you want to go down that alley? Like, you get that signal that it's like, that doesn't really feel safe. I think I'm gonna go the long way. I'm not gonna cut that corner. That is a signal that the insula sends out to the rest of the brain to just say, like, something's wrong here. Let's try to redirect. And people are sometimes better or worse at listening to that signal. And this is true of anyone of any age. But it seems as though these folks who had been financially exploited, there was a very specific extended atrophy to that structure of the brain. So it was literally the anterior insula was smaller in those individuals that had been financially exploited. So we think what's happened is the volume of that signal has gone way down. And it's a lot harder for these individuals to get that feeling that maybe they're being deceived, or just sense that something might be amiss or wrong in the things that are unfolding. And so they don't readjust their behavior to protect their assets.
Fascinating. And before I come back to some of these themes, and before I introduce Shannon Miller, I just want to point out that what you're not going to tell us as we go along here is that, and you've developed a really cool helmet that you stick your head in, and then the patient, it generates, green financial aptitude, red, watch this person. It's not, the science is not at that stage yet where there's a clear diagnosable system. We'll find out more about that. Shannon, as you listen to all this, as a person who's very interested in people who may not show up on tests as having cognitive problems, but may somehow, you've seen in your practice, are more exploitable than others. What are some of your thoughts in terms of what the legal field should, how the legal field should process this?
Yeah, it's an epidemic out there. Layer on the dark web, layer on the access that people have to our vulnerable adults by virtue of telephones, emails. We're seeing all of that. And I often tell people, if you think your information hasn't been sold on the dark web, guess again. The longer they stay on those phone calls, the more there's also this grooming effect that we're seeing. And I think a lot of us that work in the undue influence field recognize that there are really 4 different ways to unduly influence a victim. And so you layer all of that on to this exploitable, I like to call it the exploitable brain. I'm sure that's not a scientific term, but our people that are vulnerable, you really have created a perfect storm. Add into the fact that we know that baby boomers have 52% of the wealth in this country. And we have a lot of people out there who want to still have success at business. They've been successful their whole lives and they want to continue that success, but they cannot tell the difference between the truth and a lie. And their currency is discovered by the exploiter or the scammer. And now we have 2 cases that have come into our office in the last 6 months. One involved a lady who gave away $2.2 million to her love interest, and another involved $7 million going out to a pyramid scam. And so these things are happening with really people that attach to something that isn't true, and they lack the ability to detach even when they're shown that this is a delusion and it is not real. So it's very challenging for us. But I think from the law side, Florida has been really good with trying to find a way to thread the needle. We have excellent laws protecting people who are incapacitated. So we have tools to assess incapacity, and incapacity is a little different than the exploitable brain, where we know that a person lacks the ability to do certain things. They can't determine their residence. They can't make financial decisions. They can't do those things that really take care of someone's person and someone's property. But it's before that, and my understanding is it's like the 10 years before we have an incapacitated person that we see the exploitation happen. And the science is catching up, but hurry up, Nathan, because we need some tools so that we can assess those people who may be more vulnerable than others. And so, yes, we see it. Lawyers are seeing it on the front lines all the time. In fact, I'm speaking at another matter tomorrow on undue influence, because this problem is so, epidemic is the only way to describe it.
Is there nothing you can do as a lawyer when you notice, when you're using your insula to notice that a client is just not processing the risks the way that you would hope, and you're worried, but there's no way, you're not even in the same universe as going to a judge and getting some sort of order for incapacity?
Right. So we're not ready for a guardianship in many cases. And, there are some things that we can do to predict that we may become exploitable. And we've started to create tools in Florida. We have a pre-need consent against exploitation that allows us to say people that we would trust in advance to lock our assets down. And I can tell you as an estate planner, I have never had a client say, I don't want it, because they all know somebody who's been exploited. And we're also starting to use provisions in our trust agreements that are called Ulysses clauses. And these types of clauses are a way to say in advance, look, if I start to give a bunch of money away, I want a third party like a trust protector or a co-trustee to come in and really review any expenditure that's over a certain amount. So these types of provisions in trust agreements and these types of provisions related to pre-need consents against exploitation are some ways for us to say in advance, look, I know I might become exploitable. Please, these are my people that I trust more than I may trust my exploitable self to take care of me. So I don't become the person giving $2 million away or $7 million away.
In these matters, are you glad that you're specifically in the state of Florida? It seems like you have some special tools that we may not have elsewhere.
Yes, and we need to spread the word. Honestly, the exploitation injunction statute that we have in Florida has become so effective in stopping exploitation. We have judges that understand what exploitation looks like. We also have judges that will say, look, Mrs. Jones, you're functioning in every other way, but you really cannot manage your finances anymore. We see from becoming, an impoverished person giving all your money away. So we're starting to get there. What we really need is science. We need tools to assess exploitability. And, it's great, we're getting there, but this is a 20-year process. We've got the last 10 and we're looking for the first 10 to try and help us. But yeah, the tools are becoming more available, but the rest of the United States does need to catch up to Florida.
And now we're going to go to a special short presentation from someone who is very focused on the issues we're discussing here, a person with a certain amount of clout in the state of California. It's Ashley Moody, the Florida Attorney General.
I'm Ashley Moody, Florida's Attorney General. I have the great honor of heading up the Florida Department of Legal Affairs. It's our mission to protect Floridians. Since 2019, my Consumer Protection Division has secured more than $535 million in recovery and refunds. A fact highlighted recently when Florida Tax Watch named our agency the State Agency of the Year. Many of the cases our office litigates involve seniors. Sadly, older Floridians are often targeted by fraudsters. And with more than 5 million seniors who call Florida home, it's important that we do everything we can to protect them. That's why, upon taking office, I created the Senior Protection Team. Our team is comprised of attorneys, investigators, and others from the Office of Statewide Prosecution, Consumer Protection Division, and our Medicaid Fraud Control Unit. The team works across jurisdictions to help protect seniors and bring leads to law enforcement or government agencies in the best position to help. Last year, the team secured more than $1 million in relief for older Floridians. They also worked with Seniors versus Crime. This statewide volunteer program helps seniors who have been victimized. Senior sleuths, we call them, are relentless in their pursuit of justice for older consumers. Last year, they helped recover more than $1.2 million. Equally important is the work they do to warn consumers about scams and emerging threats. It's vital to identify trends and sound the alarm. And that's why within our office, we've developed 2 programs specifically to educate consumers. Our consumer alerts focus on emerging threats, and our Scams at a Glance program highlights more common repetitive schemes. Our Scams at a Glance can be printed in a trifold format and given to and discussed with your loved ones. Both of these resources are free and make it easy for our older Floridians to stay ahead of fraudsters. In addition to fighting fraud, our office also works to stop elder exploitation through our Medicaid Fraud Control Unit. Our MFCU investigators combat patient abuse, neglect, and exploitation in facilities that receive Medicaid payments. In just the past 4 years, the unit has recovered more than $74 million for Florida taxpayers. These are just a few ways we work every day to protect Florida seniors. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to help kick off this important discussion and for all that you do to protect our older Floridians. Working together and staying ahead of the trends, we will build a stronger, safer Florida.
Thank you very much for that. So I mentioned this special project I did that aired on public radio stations across the country about 6 months before pandemic, and you can still go online, keywords brains and losses, public radio, and you'll be able to listen to the thing. It has extra resources. And by the way, one of the details from that reporting that echoes what the Attorney General just said was that actually going through possible scams with people is a bit of a vaccine, an antidote. That if people have rehearsed in their head the types of scams that are being going on out there, it actually helps people recognize ones that might come their way. So I just want to briefly mention what that story was based on. It was a vehicle to talk to lots of experts like Dr. Spring. That's how we do it. But the central narrative arc was a true story, and it's a woman who was living in a small seaside town along the eastern seaboard. And when I talked to her, she was 79 years old, but still working as a school nurse, as a temp, as a sub-school nurse in public schools 4 times a week. It takes a lot of energy to do that job. And here she was at age 79. I am no doctor, and a famous gerontologist at Cornell Weill in New York laughed at me when I said, well, she seemed normal to me. He goes, and you have the credentials to evaluate? Good point. Thank you very much. I will say that after our series was reported, the family had Judy evaluated professionally, and she seemed fine. But listen to what happened to her. She got one of those pop-ups on her computer for tech support. You have a virus, click here. Unfortunately, she did, and it allowed scammers to get into her system, and they got her phone number and they started calling her over it. And they directed her to log into a bank account that should have had $29,000 in change. When she did, it was 0, 0, 0, 0. What would you do? She freaked out. And when you freak out at an anxious moment, you don't make very good decisions. The rational side of your brain is momentarily set aside. I think I figured out how they got her bank account to 0, 0, 0. They didn't take the money, but she didn't know that. I have bank records that show they transferred the money to other accounts that she ran. So it looked 0, 0. Then she started making bad decisions. Oh my God, 30,000 gone. Over time, they kept bugging her, and they said, we'll give you all your money back if you do as we say. And they got her to go down to Target and Walmart more than 100 times. Maybe not more than 100 times, but she bought more than 100 gift cards. At the time, things have changed, but at the time, 2018, you could buy gift cards of over $1,000 each. She ended up buying like $150,000 over time of scratch-off cards, giving the codes to the scammers. You know, if you ever meet me down in Florida, I'll explain to you how they can make money off that. And then there was even the moment where she transferred money from another account, $45,000, to a bank account in Nepal. I saw that bank record. And of course, she didn't get her money back. And it was this horrible story. And she can't quite explain why she kept doing this, and it went so long. She figured it out eventually after about a week, but then they started making threats against her family. On the more positive side of the story, one of her credit cards reversed about $25,000 of the charges. So when I do the math, all she lost was $196,000. That's all she lost, almost $200,000. But on the positive side, her son, adult son, got much more involved in the mom's life. The mother was resistant to having her children get involved. There are reasons for that many people here on the call may understand. They don't think that it's anyone else's business what their finances are. They're also supremely embarrassed about what's happened. But the son seized, the wrong word, but the son negotiated more financial control. She didn't lose everything, And I checked in on the family the other day, and she must be 84 now. Still going strong in many senses. The finances are stable, but this is a woman at 84 who was riding a bicycle, and she fell last week, and she broke a couple bones. But the son says she's, given the fact that she's got a couple broken bones, she's doing generally okay. So if that's useful to you to hear how we told Judy's story, but also tried to superimpose upon that story what was then state-of-the-art information about all this from 2019, brains and losses. You can go online. Now, Nathan, the study you talked about and the observed changes in the brain, you didn't quit at that point. Can you give us at least a taste, some hints about something you're working on now that informs this discussion?
Yes, absolutely. So I would like to just reflect back on a couple of things that have been said. The strongest tool that we have right now are to render people incapacitated, and that's a very dramatic instrument to remove someone's independence, like pretty uniformly and in a devastating way. But there aren't very many good tools leading up to that, and that's where I think we do need to develop some means to detect folks who become increasingly vulnerable. An important part of that is to continue to speak to other family members and to talk about one's finances and start to put some stopgaps in place in the event that there is a loss of control and critically insight. And I think that's a particular issue with regards to being able to really reflect upon what's happening and recognizing if one is slipping in their ability to manage their own finances. And that's somewhat related to our more recent work, where there's something unique about our ability to listen to our body and to have awareness as to our own body signals. So I mentioned, that the insula is critically involved in that feeling of whether or not you should walk down that street or you should make this financial decision. In fact, this is a region of the brain that's also critically involved in what's called interoceptive awareness, which is our ability to be aware of our internal body states. And we can measure this in the laboratory with regards to how accurately people can track their own heart rate. And interestingly, we recently discovered that older adults' ability to accurately introspect and know the rate of their heart beating, or of high introspective accuracy, they are better at detecting deception, both in viewing arousing videos of people who are telling the truth versus lying, as well as detecting phishing emails and other email forms of scam. So across two totally separate modalities, like one of them in writing, another one is in full color video, the ability to accurately detect deception is related to the accuracy with which one can detect one's own heartbeat. So there's a key link between our brain's ability to make decisions about trustworthiness and honesty and our own ability to be in tune with our feelings and our body. And what's important is that we can make changes here. We can develop intervention strategies that allow people to improve their ability to be in tune with their own emotions and to be in tune with their own body. So this may be an important factor with regards to an increasingly aging population that is very concerned about their own decision-making capacity and their own abilities, and potentially engaging in training courses focused on breath or mindfulness could actually improve other aspects of their life with regards to continuing to manage their finances independently.
Now, Nathan, will not yet published, right?
Not yet. So it's part of an ongoing large research project that's happening in collaboration with Natalie Ebner in Gainesville at the University of Florida. So hopefully over the next few years, we'll have a lot more insight into some of these neurobiological processes. So I think for a long time, vulnerability to exploitation was not thought about as a biomedical issue. It was thought about as a sociological matter of personal choice, people just making bad decisions. And the fact of the matter is there are changes that occur to the brain that change how people make their decisions. And this happens in a systematic way, but it doesn't happen to everyone. And there's so much variability across people that it's hard to figure out who is going to go on this trajectory of increasing vulnerability. So again, these are some of our challenges. And so we're conducting these larger studies now to sample very broadly across the state of Florida to see what are some of the predictors of those who are vulnerable.
By the way, how do you measure interoceptive awareness?
In this case, we hook people up to just a heart rate monitor that's just a simple clip that's on the finger. So we know what their heart rate is, and the participant can't see what the data is, and they use their other hand and they tap when they think their heart is beating. And we simply look at the association between those two. And that's our measure of accuracy.
And they can't cheat, right? They can't measure their pulse with the other hand, right?
That's right. That's right.
Okay. Now I'm understanding. Because Shannon's over there in the law office thinking, wouldn't it be great to just have a pulse oximeter handy and nail this down? I want to mention that there are other approaches to this that are fascinating. Peter Lichtenberg at Wayne State University is a noted researcher in this area, and he comes up with batteries of questions that in sophisticated ways attempt and have been shown to identify what Shannon would call exploitability in some adults. Some of the stuff, if you go to his website, which is older, I just wrote it down, Older Adult Nest Egg. I think it's .org, but Older Adult Nest Egg has some of the techniques. You can sign up for some training. Professionals can sign up for some training for how to administer the tests. Let me just read to you the screening tool that Dr. Lichtenberg and team have developed. One of them uncovers whether a person may be currently under undue influence, be psychologically susceptible to outside influence, or unable to make sound, rational financial decisions. And there's like a rating scale where the adult understood the financial decision and made it with integrity. That's how they frame it up there, integrity, not whether the decision was wise. Quote, older adults, like all adults, have the right to make poor financial choices, Dr. Lichtenberg is quoted as saying. We need to assess whether the decision was authentic. Really interesting formulation there, Shannon. Would you agree?
I agree. And unfortunately, having seen people who are very high functioning in their lives and very successful individuals, sometimes they don't have the ability to assess that. And so it may be perceived as a wise decision, but it still may be a product of that thinning of the cortical insula. If you had asked them 10 years before, when they didn't have that process going on in their brains, they would never have given $2 million away. They would never have invested $7 million in that scam. But for the fact that they're having this thinning of the cortical insula layered on with the undue influencer, with that person who has figured out what their currency is. You've been successful businessman. I'm going to give you a potentially hugely successful business that feeds your currency, and you have this vulnerability. And that's really where the problem comes in, is how do you determine whether that was a wise, insightful, decision, or it wasn't. And, it's very challenging for us right now. So I hear what Dr. Lichtenberg is saying, and I'm glad that he continues to create tools that, we want to keep people as independent as possible. If people are not vulnerable and they have all their faculties and they don't have a thinning of the cortical insula, and they want to give all their money away, so be it. but we do create laws to protect people who have vulnerabilities due to physical defects. And we do that because, honestly, I've had a lot of clients who once the money is all gone and now the love interest is gone from their life and they're completely impoverished, the end result of that story is a death event. We have so many situations where we see our vulnerable adult attached to this person who eventually is going to ride in on their horse, sweep him or her up, and they're going to live happily ever after. And then when all the money's gone, that person is gone, and our vulnerable adult has a death event from it because it is so unconscionable to them that this wasn't true. And, that is only because of this problem in their brain.
I met a law professor actually who had a dad in Florida, elderly, and the dad fell in love with some 40-year-old who spotted him walking along the sidewalk with his cane one day and started to give away the farm. And this was an unusual outcome. They actually got restitution of half his money. She was known to authorities, and they had a particularly vigorous detective in I think it was Hollywood, Florida. It's been a while since I reviewed that document, but they got half the money back. So yay, half the money. That is very rare. Yet he passed away 3 months later. And could we make the case that it was stress from this whole thing? First of all, he wouldn't believe his own children about the situation. You can't draw a straight line, but the supposition is that it didn't do him any good going through this, and may have shortened his life.
Yeah, there's a lot of shame when this happens to people, and it's extraordinary how prevalent this problem is, but it's very challenging to study because people aren't exactly coming forward to declare that they've been exploited. It's often hidden, and like we don't really know the true toll of the losses because of this as well. And it's a real challenge in the context of aging because however many bad financial decisions we all might make in our lives over the lifespan, it's those ones that occur in our 60s and 70s and 80s that we can't recover from. There's not enough time to rebuild one's wealth. And so that leads to very significant declines in quality of life and an extraordinary amount of stress as well, which is going to take a harder toll on one's health with advancing age.
I think this is a great time for some of your questions. We're very patient, everyone on the call. And Kelly?
Sure. So the first one here, I'll just go ahead and answer for our attendees today. You will have access to the recording. We will put this up in full on the elder law section of the Florida Bar's YouTube channel, and we'll send that link as well as other links and resources we talked about here today to our attendees. Another question that we have here is thoughts on legitimate charities, financial development departments that are perhaps benefiting from a client's decline.
I'll take that one. and actually, I kind of want to combine that one with another question that is from, it says, the exploitation is taking forms that merge into what otherwise would seem to be routine occurrences. Most notably is the elderly being exploited by financial intermediaries who are skilled in the arts of persuasion. Sadly, often annuity transactions is one example. Now we have unscrupulous advisors, agents with access to third-party web-based prepared estate planning documents, providing additional channel of manipulation that takes on the appearance of normal and reasonable routines. And yes, that is happening. But let me just reiterate that our exploitation criminal laws, really across the country, have now been adopted to address these types of fiduciaries taking advantage of our vulnerable adults. And so if you actually look at Florida statute 825.103, The very first two definitions of criminal exploitation are related to knowing, obtaining, or using an elderly person's funds with the intent to temporarily or permanently deprive the elderly person of the use of those funds, if by a person who stands in a position of trust, that's number one, and number two, has a business relationship with the elderly person or disabled adult. The second part of that definition explains that if the exploiter, I like to call them, or that fiduciary who's taking advantage and putting a 93-year-old into an annuity for 10 years, okay, if they knew or should have known that that person was really unable to enter into that type of transaction, again, that is the crime of exploitation. Now, I'm going to hear this, yes, but they never prosecute those crimes. Okay. You as a civil practitioner still have the ability, at least in Florida, to walk into any courtroom, get an ex parte injunction with some very willing judges across the state to stop that process. And the judge has broad discretion to return the assets that have been taken as a result of that improper annuity and put it back into the hands of our victim. We also have this thing called civil theft in Florida, which creates treble damages. So if that annuity company put $100,000 into the 93-year-old's annuity, you can make a request to the annuity company, return the money within 30 days, or you're going to have to give us back $300,000 instead of $100,000. So we have very great tools in Florida to recover these assets, in addition to it being a crime that can be prosecuted. But we also, as practitioners, need to exercise and be good advocates and good sources of, kind of taking these cases on and then litigating them. They're not hard, and getting money back for our vulnerable people. So I'm sorry if I kind of jumped in on that one.
All right, here we go. How do you protect vulnerable adults while still trying to maintain their independence? For example, my parents can't really distinguish between legitimate and fake shopping sites or scams. Their email inbox is full of complete junk, and I know they click on it and get on more and more lists. What is the best way to protect them from exploitation from email and social media scams?
Yeah, that's a real challenge. And we are developing some toolboxes that can be customized to individuals' email accounts that incorporate some machine learning AI approaches that can better identify phishing or scam emails. And if not entirely screen them, then at least flag them as being high risk, so that there's an additional level of vigilance that's taken. So these are toolboxes that Gmail is interested in. They haven't been incorporated yet, but there's a lot of discussion on that end. So this is where hopefully we can just, by increasing the awareness of the prevalence of this and discussing how more people are vulnerable than what we think, and then just raising just the number of red flags externally so that we don't have to rely upon older adults' internal processing, that may help support the decision-making of older adults, to allow them to have their autonomy, but also just give them a little bit more information about the kinds of choices they're making. But
and I would add to that there are now, this idea of trusted contacts, and making sure that our financial advisors have designated trusted contacts for our vulnerable adults. And also we're starting to use this idea of trusted contacts when we start to see financial exploitation occurring outside of a financial advisor situation. There's also this really good app, and there may be other apps. I'm not trying to plug any particular app, but there's an app, it's called Careful with 2 L's. And the Careful app is a place where you can actually list your assets. And when a bill is, they have this great algorithm, when a bill is paid twice, or when a bill is forgotten to be paid, or when a payment is made to a nefarious recipient, the trusted contacts named in the app are alerted. Hey, your mom, dad, whoever have made a payment of $25,000 to this recipient that looks to be nefarious. FYI. And it's not a way for people to control the assets, but they're notified. And that can be the flare that goes up to alert our trusted contacts and people, hey, we need to start paying attention now. There's some bad things happening within this world. So now might be the time to have a family meeting. It might be the time to start thinking about successor trustees taking over trusts. It may be the time to start thinking about the possibility of giving up the rights to manage your finances. Let your trusted person start to manage those instead.
I think a really key part of this is just increasing the transparency within family units and between like close trusted friends. When I was growing up, my parents never said how much money they made. It really was a taboo topic to discuss money and income. And I think that was really detrimental in some ways, because as a young adult, I had to figure out a lot of stuff on my own. And I know coming up now, my father is turning 80 soon. We really, and I've spurred him on a little bit, but I think it's getting more critical to have the kinds of conversations that allow for more openness and understanding as to what his assets are and how are they protected, and really in the interest of preserving his own interest. Like would he want his money spent like in the times when he's not going to have the decisional capacity to necessarily manage them. So I think starting to have conversations early, I think Careful is a great product to just help increase transparency. And it's almost a bridge to just have more access and understanding so more conversations can occur. And then maybe further down the line, slowly shifting over some of the decisional authority, but in a way where we always have the consent of our elders for how their estate is managed.
I talked to a researcher at the Stanford Longevity Center about these discussions, and she had an interesting suggestion, which is, we hope that we've had the talk with our older loved ones about advanced medical directives. Often you think about, hey, I hope they have a will, and so you have that discussion. I mean, some people don't, but everybody knows you should. She suggested a third talk. And so advanced medical directives, the will stuff. Third one would be, hey, you're great now, A-okay, firing on all cylinders. If, God forbid, at some point, you're not firing on all cylinders, when you're getting a little vague, what do you want your life to look like? How do you want help from us? Who do you think should be there for you, helping you with these decisions? That kind of discussion, this third thing. And I thought that was really useful. I will say that's not easy. My father's no longer with us, but he was with us when we did that series. I sat down in front of a camera with him, my father, to have that third discussion. And he's a great guy, my father, and very wise, and a college professor. He wasn't having any of it. He was like, it was as close as I am and was with my father. He was of the, this is none of your business stuff. So you ease into that discussion. Is there another question, Kelly?
Let me add on to that. And I know I'm just going to add one more layer to that. And that is, every year we should be meeting with our people, talking about what our assets are. And this is our trusted people. And sometimes they're not your family. Sometimes it's different types of helpers. But we should be meeting, we should be talking about where the assets are and what happens if. What happens if? What happens if I become exploitable? What happens if I become incapacitated? And those are very important conversations that we should be encouraging everyone to have. It's very, we know 40% of people have been exploited over the age of 80, have been exploited in the last 5 years or scammed, 40%. So it's a huge amount of people that we're talking about. And we also need to recognize that a lot of people understand that they might become exploitable. It's only when they get past that time, when they are exploitable, that they start to change their ideas about sharing information. At the beginning of that process, they understand that it might happen to them, and they're at that point very willing to create plans and contingencies. And that makes it so much easier. It's when we plan ahead that we recognize those things, and then we have an action plan. Everybody's already bought into it. So sorry. Yes, we do have more questions.
And I know we're running out of time, so unfortunately we won't get to all of them, but I think we have time for one more. I saw a great one here. Any suggestions about getting law enforcement to understand the nuance of undue influence?
Well, I've been trying for a long time. And it's a challenge, but it's a challenge just like everyone else. You know, it is really a challenge because we want to honor people's wishes. And we know that undue influence is always circumstantial. It's never going to be witnessed. We are never going to have a witness walk into court and say, I saw so-and-so say to so-and-so that unless you give me your money, your family's going to put you in the nursing home. Or your family is stealing money from you. That's why you should make me your agent under power of attorney. You know, those things do not happen with witnesses. It always happens behind closed doors. Law enforcement and adult protective services often come in, they assess whether someone is incapacitated. They can't assess exploitability. So it is a very difficult, it's a very difficult assessment to make. I know I sometimes have trouble with it, and I see it every day. So, I think we need the science to continue to develop, and we need to keep doing what we're doing right here, is to talk about it, to talk about things that, obviously we're learning as we go, but also to be alert and to create ways for us to protect people without taking away their rights. And there are ways to do that. We can limit the protection to the attachment to the delusion, as opposed to making someone lose all their rights. Maybe what we do is we just create some guardrails and some gatekeeping over certain assets.
If I could just follow that, I think something that I think really needs to be considered more deeply is like, who are the perpetrators? Now, a lot of the initiatives that are launched by the financial industry regulatory authorities and Attorney General Moody, I spoke to this, are fraudsters and scams that are occurring from perpetrators who don't know the victim. They're casting out a wide net to try to steal money. But actually, this represents less than 50% of cases of financial exploitation. What I think is really important to know is that most cases of financial exploitation occur with somebody that's known. It's a member of the family. It's somebody that's close. And that is not something that law enforcement or a lot of the financial industries are thinking about. I think they want to be able to solve the problem of some bad person out there trying to steal money, but it's really complicated when you go into these family systems to understand those dynamics. So while a lot of our solutions are, be more transparent, lean into the people you trust and communicate with them, that also has to be done with a lot of care and forethought, because the probabilities are also that one of those people that you're trusting could become a perpetrator. So I think the importance is really building broad social networks, not just with one person or two people. And to do so, I think we really need to just improve how we communicate with each other and in our families and with our friends about money. And this is something that we just don't do very much of.
Yeah, communicating at all, by the way, like all communication is nice. That researcher at Wayne State was trying to figure out what are some of the determinants of extra vulnerability. And someone suggested a survey question that was at first poo-poo. Well, I'm not going to ask that. That couldn't pan out. They asked it anyway. And it was striking what the result was. The question was, why do you answer phone calls from people you don't know. And something like a quarter of the respondents said because they wanted somebody to talk to. They were essentially lonely. So just sort of a personal note there, a human note there. I want to thank everybody for this. I want to thank Shannon Miller, and I want to thank Nathan Sprang. I want to thank Kelly, but especially the elder law section of the Florida Bar for making this possible with support from the Florida Attorney General's office. I'm David Brancaccio. If you want to hear the business news in the morning, turn on public radio. I'm usually there. I turn up like a bad penny most mornings, and I pledge to stay engaged on this issue with some of my coverage on the air. So thank you everyone for joining us. And as you heard, there'll be ways for you to be able to review this session if you find it useful for the work that you do.